Welcome back to the 246th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including Republicans trying to stop the student loan program that, was making its way to the Supreme Court, and an argument that the Supreme Court is not going to allow it just because it's Biden's policy, how the open border may be letting in some terror threats, and a interesting story about China flooding the market with really cheap solar panels. And of course, we will end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So, I was messing around with Claude last night, not new, it's actually been around for a while, but a different type of AI system. And I'll be honest, how much time have you guys spent with some of these AI systems? Because Claude's pretty good. And if I'm looking for an AI system, I kind of like Claude because it has a little bit of snarkiness to it. Maybe it was just feeding back to me what I was giving it. But even if it is, that's better than ChatGPT. It felt very... ChatGPT feels like, oh, what can I do for you? I will solve all your problems. Oh, thank you for using me. Claude at least gave me a little bit more of the, hey, I know what I am, and I'm not just like a servant kind of vibe, which I kind of enjoyed a little bit more. So tell me what you think. If you haven't tried it out, go try it out. All you need is like an email. They're probably collecting a whole bunch of information. They're collecting anything you put in there. That's fair enough. I wouldn't be surprised. But at least give it a chance. And, maybe write up something special for it so it can't just read some of the previous things. Because you can, upload files, and it can analyze things like that. So go through, give it a little look-see, and tell me what you think. So with that daily debate out of the way, let's jump to our first article that comes from prospect.org. And like I said earlier, the headline reads, Republicans attempt to invalidate Democratic policy because it's Democratic. And, this is an accusation that goes around on both sides of the aisle. They don't want to support it because it's a Republican bill. It's mainly been backed by Republicans. They don't want to cross the partisan lines, especially with the House divided as it is. You see this coming from both sides. But in this specific one, they're not talking about, the House or the Senate or the presidency. They're talking about the Supreme Court. And there is a point here, which is the Supreme Court, because they are mainly constitutionalists, and they happen to have one lean more than the other, and a lot of people don't see them as just calling balls and strikes. They're just balls and strikes anymore. They're just there to be basically activists, as some people see them. This accusation gets thrown around a lot more. But the question really is this okay? Can the federal government just forgive student debt? Well, the Democrats and Joe Biden, his legal team, and people at the Prospect seem to believe he has a really good case to do so this time, even though the first time he did it, he actually wasn't able to get it through. And I think that's one thing the author, they kind of throw it to the side. They even at one point quote saying, people get mad at Joe Biden because Joe Biden acknowledges that he couldn't do it another way, so he was trying to find another way to do it. And the interesting thing is, the original proposal, the Supreme Court actually struck it down, and he moved forward with it anyway, even though there was supposed to be a stay of some sorts on the policy. And I think that's what Republicans were actually mad about, that Biden was obviously told his first attempts at relieving student debt were unconstitutional and then proceeded to do it anyway. I don't necessarily think that they were so frustrated that he was trying to find a different way to do it. And what I mean by that is they're frustrated that he wants to do it at all. But I don't think they were frustrated that, he's going to try a new way to get done what he wants to get done. The original one was basically an executive order, which would be too much power vested in the executive. At least that's how the Supreme Court originally went about talking about it. But that's a lot of mishmash. There's a lot of things that I just kind of threw together there. So let's actually get to this article in particular. So I want to read the first paragraph. Quote, when the Biden administration introduced a mass student debt relief program, the main argument that from conservative attorneys generals opposing what the thing was that it was novel. No administration had used the HEROES Act to cancel student debt, though the legislation explicitly enables the Education Secretary to waive or modify student loan payments in the statute. The element of newness forms the backbone of the so-called major questions doctrine, which alleges that the application of a statute that have large effects need to be more than directly defined and authorized. So that's the first thing they're laying out here. They're saying, okay, yeah, the conservatives didn't like it. It was novel. It felt like it was too much. So they're just vesting too much power in this new legal theory, this new novel idea. But then the author comes back and says, but there's a little bit more to it. Quote, last week, many of the same conservative attorneys generals filed another lawsuit again against the Biden administration student loan program. But this one is not new. It's the administration's version of a program that has been in place for over 30 years, and when it was initiated by Republican presidents. If the Supreme Court agrees to throw out the Biden program, they'll have made the subtext text. Democrat regulation of any kind, whether new interpretations or variations on long-settled public policy, are presumptively illegal. So, what they're getting at, and that's the end of the quote there for the first two paragraphs, what they're getting at is basically, no. Okay, this was something that Biden was throwing together. He was putting it on the docket. And obviously, if you object to it, if you're sitting there and objecting to it, you just don't want to see these people get their debt paid off. And when they come up with a new way to go about it, then that has been long tested, you can obviously tell it's not just about whether or not this is a novel theory. And my real question is, okay, so what you're arguing is, when they use a novel theory to get something done and the Republicans don't like it, but then there's a tried and true way to get something done, the Republicans don't like it, that's obviously hypocrisy. There's two questions that arises, or not hypocrisy, just plain partisanship. There's two things that arise for me, is one, if there was a tried and true tested way of doing this, why wouldn't you do that first? Why would you try to approach it in a novel way? Unless you're just trying to expand your executive powers and you're just trying to have a blatant power move, then, okay, I understand it. But if you knew this was a tried and trusted way, why didn't you do it in the first place? Maybe because it didn't actually have the breadth that you wanted it to. Maybe because it couldn't actually take on as many students' debt or actually relieve them with as much debt as you had previously hoped. Maybe because that statute didn't actually serve your means and now you're trying to stretch it to serve your means when you're trying to take on a whole new novel idea. And then the second one is, why are the Republicans, why are you saying that they're hypocritical? They're opposed to relieving the student debt, and they don't like the way you're trying to do it with the novel theory, and they don't like the way you're trying to do it with the new theory. I don't think that this actually shows too much hypocrisy. I'll be honest. The author is trying to stretch it here because guess what? If using the novel theory is a overreach of executive power and is illegal and the state's attorney generals want to push back against it, they're going to push back against it. If using the new method, or sorry, technically the old method, but the new way that Biden's trying to do it, aka the old tried and true method, isn't legal either, or they have grounds to sue on it for, then they're gonna sue. Just because they are trying to take down both ways that you're trying to approach it doesn't mean that they're just doing it because you're a president. It's because they don't agree with the policy, obviously. So guess what? Your argument that is just because it's a Democrat is not true, because the original statute, which was put into place by Ronald Reagan, yes, the right loved Ronald Reagan, okay? Everybody loves Ronald Reagan on the right. So obviously, if he did it, it has to be perfect. That's basically what he's implying, which is it was put in place by Ronald Reagan, so therefore, Republicans should be game for it. But guess what? Maybe it exceeds the original mandate. This new interpretation, the new way that Biden wants to do it, exceeds the original mandate. And let's be clear, I'm not opposed to arguments here that are good faith. And people saying for the longest time, the Higher Education Act, I believe is the actual name. Hold on, let me make sure. So we took a little brief pause there for me to make sure, yes, the Higher Education Act was actually signed in by George W. Bush, not Mr. Reagan. So Reagan's little lackey. So just because the progressives have been saying this for a long time, that you could actually use this idea, this is the proper way to have done the student debt relief from the very beginning. So if progressives have been saying that you could do it this way, why would Joe Biden do it the different way first? Maybe because, like I said, there are certain aspects of his plan for student debt relief that don't fall within the purview of the Higher Education Act. And guess what? It doesn't change the fact that Republicans are opposed to either way of doing it. It's not just because Biden is a Democrat. I promise you that much. On an ideological level, which I don't think people on the left necessarily understand, on an ideological level, the right is not okay. The conservatives are not okay with using the government in order to pay off people's student loans, in order to relieve this debt. The thought process is, hey, you took on this debt, you took on this responsibility, you are your own person, pay it off. You went to college in order to increase your, how should I say, the value, your self-value in the marketplace, to get a degree that would make you more appealing to people as you go out in the workforce. And I'm sorry if it hasn't necessarily worked out, but that's life. You take on risks. Now, for those of you who are yelling and screaming, saying, well, hey, but if they're not okay with bailing out people for their bad decisions, why are they okay with bailing out big banks? And if you're saying that, you're yelling that at the screen, because I know I have yelled that at the screen before, then, hey, we're in the same boat. They should not have bailed out the big banks. Those big banks took on terrible during 2008 crisis, in case you don't know what I'm talking about. But for me, I grew up during that time. So when this talking point comes up, I immediately know what I'm talking about. And you could even say that's the case with like Silicon Valley Bank, the recent collapse. Even though that was Democrats, Republicans were still behind it, even though it was a Democratic administration. And they can say, well, no, that was a Joe Biden thing. But at the end of the day, the Republicans were also afraid about a financial collapse, or at least the appearance of one, so they were going to back it no matter what. But yes, that argument works on me. The Republicans, they were not consistent on that one. They said, oh, yeah, we'll bail out these big banks. And the question is, no, those banks, they took on the risk. They took on those subprime mortgages. They were speculating on them. And then they basically, I don't want to say basically, it wasn't just them. There were a few different factors. But at the end of the day, their practices accumulated and created the problem that ended up causing the financial crash and caused a lot of them to go out of business. And it created a whole bunch of different acquisitions. The government stepped in and said, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to put in new laws. We're basically going to bail out these banks so that the economy doesn't keep going downward. But the same argument would apply. They took on that risk, and that's a part of life. Guess what? You're the ones that did this practice, and you should have to bear the responsibility of it, just like the Republicans are arguing for student debt relief. They're using the same argument that they should have used for the banks, and some did, let's be clear, but a lot of them did not. So if you want to argue that they're inconsistent on their principles, I will 100% agree with you, but this is one where panic and fear does not resonate as much with them. And I'm not justifying, I'm saying if you are a legislator and you think the entire system is going to collapse and it will hurt tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and it will crash the American economy, then that is going to make you very fearful, and you're going to step in and do things that are against your principles. Not okay, shouldn't be allowed, but I can at least understand the completely human side of it. I can empathize with the emotions that some of those senators, those congressmen, and even some of the people in the Bush administration would have been feeling at that time. And on student debt relief, it's not going to crash the economy if they don't relieve it, so they're not going to want to do it. But my point overall being, one, Republicans, they're not just hating on it because it's Biden. They're opposed to it on principle. The second part, highlighting where they're hypocrites. Yes, their principles do fail sometimes, and maybe they need to take a serious look in the mirror. And three, Biden has explicitly said that he didn't like that the Supreme Court struck it down, so he's going to try a different way, or he's going to keep going because he wants to get this done. So he obviously has a partisan agenda here. He's going to take whatever path he can to get to his end. So if Republicans see that, I feel as though they're justified in order to strike it down. Even, they believe in it in principle, but even just to check Joe Biden and say, hey, look, we know you have this ultimate agenda goal, and we understand that you want to get there however you want. That doesn't mean you can do it in an illegal way. And maybe this one will make it through the Supreme Court. Maybe this challenge will be Biden's golden ticket, and they're sitting there like, oh, well, hey, we can't actually do anything, but we tried. But we'll see how that one ends up. So let's jump to our second article that comes from New York Post. Biden's open borders have created a terror threat, and the what ifs are chilling. So I'll be honest with you. When the initial rhetoric was coming out from a few different people that, hey, terrorists can just stream across the border. There's going to be terror cells. We need to watch out for a terror attack that's coming. I was like, okay. It's kind of reminiscent of different language about, hey, we need to bail out the banks because this terrible thing could happen. Or, hey, we need to increase the surveillance power of the state in order to fight back 9/11. Totally all different situations. I'm not trying to say they're exactly the same, but it definitely gave me that feeling of, oh, hey, this is fear policy making. This is fear. I don't want to say mongering, but this is definitely fear tactics. And hey, we need to be very cautious. While I don't disagree that if the border is indeed open, and wide open's a overused term, but at least open enough that a whole bunch of people can go across. I believe the estimate is 860,000 gotaways. So people that didn't even interact with the Border and Customs Patrol at all. Then yeah, there's a likelihood that some people slip through. So I was at least willing to hear out that argument, but that doesn't mean I believe there were like terror cells on the other side. And then I had a conversation with somebody who, during the course of my work, who I don't want to say is more informed on it, but had a very strong opinion, had been talking with other people who may know a little bit more. And he was basically saying, there might be some different training locations for different groups that don't necessarily love America so much. And I was sitting there like, really? Come on. And then I thought to myself, well, I guess the 9/11 pilots were able to actually train here in the United States. I mean, I read an entire book that detailed them getting their license in Florida, one of the pilots not being able to actually come because of some custom restrictions. So they flew out another person. They got their license, I believe, Florida. I think one of them also got it in either Arizona or New Mexico. But the point being that they were let into this country in a completely normal fashion. They were, checked, and it wasn't like they snuck in. They were let in a legal way. And obviously things have changed since then. We've tightened some policies. We try to keep track of more people that come into the nation with overwhelming security state vibes. Not saying that it's not justified if it stops attacks, but it does make me wonder how much they're watching everything we do as well. But hey, that's, that's just the paranoid side of me. I understand. I can be a little bit suspicious of the government's good intentions, but hey, that is what it is. But the point being that argument I started to listen and say, okay, maybe there might be a little something to this. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to go out there and fear monger. I'm not going to go on the podcast and say anything about it. And then this article came out, and there is a person who came across the border that we were able to easily identify, and we know is someone who is not, how should I say, ain't the best. He probably should not be in the nation, and it also highlights some of the issues that Border Patrol has had. So I just want to highlight this. I'm not trying to, like I said, not trying to fearmonger, not trying to say, hey, we all need to be worried about this. It's just a genuine concern that needs to be brought up. So, first quote that I want to pull from this article. The Border Patrol has recorded 70 encounters with individuals on the terror watch list since October 2023. In the 12 months before that, the number was 172. So, out of the 8,000, and let's just say that the 8,600 gotaways is the total number, which is not, because there are lots of more people that we actually encountered. And we're assuming that number that we actually encountered is going to be a little bit higher. Let's say it's 1 million. So 1 million plus 1,860,000. 172 plus 70, 242. Out of that many people coming into the nation, that is an extremely, extremely low number. And even if we're to remove the gotaways, okay, and we say it's 1 million people, that number is extremely small. And let's just pretend that, it's doubled for the gotaways, so we have about an even number of gotaways, about 1 million versus 860,000. Let's just assume that the same amount of people that would be on the terrorist watch list actually made it into the country as gotaways. Then we're still only looking at 484 people out of that many millions upon thousands of people that came into the country. That number is extremely low. So that's why I don't want to fearmonger about it. But it is something that at least needs to be on the radar, like I was talking about. There are a few quotes from Christopher Wray here that I want to highlight as well. Quote, the FBI Director Christopher Wray last month warned Congress of a threat stream that we're very concerned about, a smuggling network with ISIS ties that's exploiting the Biden open border policy to sneak people into the country. And let's be clear, New York Post does something really tricky here, where they say a threat stream that we are very concerned about, end quote, a begin quote, smuggling network, end quote, with begin quote, ISIS, end quote, ties. So at the end of the day, they're actually adding in and editorializing that's exploiting the Biden open border policy. I know that sometimes when I'm just reading things, you can't necessarily see 100% how the quotes break down. So Christopher Wray is not there saying, the president that I'm working under has an open border policy, because that would get him fired almost immediately. But there are a few specific instances that they want to talk about here. Quote, last week, the new NYPD busted a group of Venezuelan migrant squatters in the Bronx, finding drugs, ammo, firearms, including ghost guns, which it's funny to see Republicans talking about ghost guns, because that's normally a liberal talking point, in their basement hideout. And then there were one more that I wanted to talk about as well, which is, I believe, unless they edited the article since I last read about it, yes. On Tuesday, Republican lawmakers demanded Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas answer why a known Somalian terrorist, a, quote, confirmed member of Shabab, end quote, was allowed to roam free in the United States for nearly a year. The Border Patrol picked up the man, 27, in California in March 2023, but screwed up the terror watch list screening and let him go. He eventually found his way to Minnesota, where after the feds clocked the mistake, Immigration and Customs Enforcement nabbed him in January. So, point being, at least they realized they messed up. There are obviously screening methods that go into this, and he was able to be picked up. Hopefully that's the case with everybody. But all it takes is one person messing up and someone being allowed to stay in this country. I'm not, like I said before, I'm going to say it again, not trying to fearmonger. You just got to be aware of it. These sort of things, you just have to be aware, especially for me, who is passionate, like, no, it's not happening, not a big deal. And you read something like this, and it at least opens your eyes to maybe what they were talking about ain't the craziest thing in the world. Maybe it is insane, but maybe it's not the craziest thing in the world, and to at least be vigilant about it and to be having these conversations. I would rather have these conversations and have a little bit of a discussion of trying to find these different people who could be threatening the United States within there without exploiting too much power, but at least being on the watch for them and being vigilant about it, than not talking about it at all. That doesn't mean we're going to expand the Custom and Border Patrol powers to search everybody, to use an algorithm through all the cameras to find all these people, to invade your privacy. No, but at least throw a little bit of extra time and money into looking down or looking for people that have these sort of problems and, trying to track down maybe on social media. They've posted something and you can easily access that. Yeah, sure. Put some extra resources into it without completely violating the rights of your citizens, because that's what the fear-mongering normally does. It violates the rights. They use it as a means to get the people to be okay with them violating the rights. No, we just need to be informed. We need to be informed in public. So if something does come down, also it helps you out because now you know about the numbers. They're not as large as some people would like you to believe. So then when they start trying to justify a large sweeping bill that could impact people, you can say, no. Hey, I heard this random guy on the internet who was quoting the New York Post. That's a lot of filtering of information, that this is only the number that's happening here. Or maybe you go and do your own research after listening to this one. But don't be afraid and just shut off. Actually investigate it a little bit and do your own research as well. So let's jump to our last article. It'll be a very, very quick one. It comes from Business Insider. China has flooded the market with so many solar panels that people are using them as garden fences. And we know that China has been the best low-cost producer of, or at least the most productive low-cost producer of solar panels over the last few years. But now it's kind of getting insane. No longer are people saying, oh, they're so expensive that I have to mount them just right. They get the right angle, so on and so forth. No, they're saying, hey, I can throw them up on as a fence. They're so cheap. And now they don't have to be at the perfect angle in order to get sunlight, but they're still going to produce energy for me. And this is what happens when 80% of the solar panel industry is in China, and China is trying to undercut all of its competition around the world so that it is the sole producer, or at least it has the sole companies or the most well-equipped companies that have survived the really large price cuts that, they get rid of all the competition across the world, and then they can jack up the price from there. But it's actually interesting. You can go read a whole bunch about the overproduction, what Janet Yellen's going to do. But it's actually very interesting because it's not just hurting other companies in other countries in general. It's actually hurting the companies that are producing them as well. Quote, Beijing is championing what it's called the new three industries of solar, electronic vehicles, and lithium-ion batteries to drive its economy. China is struggling to pivot from its reliance on real estate, which is now mired with a debt crisis. China's overcapacity distorts global prices and production patterns and hurts American firms and workers, as well as firm and workers around the world, Yellen said. They will also convey my belief that it is hurting the Chinese economy and the Chinese producers. So, guess what? Yeah, if you are being forced by state policy to put a overabundance on the market and therefore actually make it so that there are so many out there that anybody can pay really low prices because they're saying, well, I don't necessarily want this one, I want that one. There's so much competition out there. There are so many options that maybe I can find your panel somewhere else, or the panel that got sent to you by that Chinese company, maybe someone else is selling it a little bit cheaper, and it forces everybody to lower their prices. And then since they're all coming from the same producer and they're all competing against each other in a foreign market, then that producer actually makes less money, and they've had to lay people off recently. So we'll see how this one pans out. I think that a green transition is probably not the best. A all-out transition is not going to be the best thing, but anything we can do in order to have more diverse ways of getting energy, and especially if it's cheap, which was one of the main issues with green energy, this is a good thing, or at least the transition to that or the inclusion of that technology is a good thing. Now, if China's just going to completely undercut the market in order to make sure nobody else can come in and innovate, that, especially if it's state policy. If it was company policy, which I don't think it is, because even companies are having to lay off workers because of how much they're being forced to put out there, or at least how much is being put out there. That's why I think it's a state policy. That's why I think it's an issue versus if a company can put out this many, no biggie, and they can just crush everybody else, hey, other people need to step up their game. That's the free market. But if it's a state policy where they're subsidizing them and they're just throwing a whole bunch onto the market in order to increase reliance on these Chinese producers, but also to destroy any other competition around the world, that's a different conversation. So with all that, let's jump to our positive story for today. We've been talking about geopolitics, internal politics, hate politics, blah, 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 blah. We don't like hate politics. We like positive politics. We want to spread love and joy. Oh my gosh, I sound like such a hippy-dippy kind of guy. So, our daily delight today comes from Parade Pets, and the headline reads, Hero Dog persistently tries to warn mom after stove catches on fire. And I'll tell you now, yes, dogs are awesome. The fact that this dog knew that something bad was happening, that there was danger in the household, and he's telling mom, hey, I need you to get off your butt and go check the stove, especially right before this woman was about to go to bed. This is a dog that you have to admire, that you have to love. This is why we all love doggos, or at least to some capacity, we like dogs. And if you want to check out this article, read a little bit more, or you want to check out any of today's articles, there will be a link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, as well as Podvine. And we're going to do something a little bit cheeky, okay? I'm going to give you a little sneak peek to a little edit that I put together for one of the new segments that we did on, I believe we practiced it on Wednesday. But hey, I understand, not the best thing in the world, but I made it myself, so I am semi-proud. And it's kind of going to be cheap. I'm just going to play it on the phone, and it's going to come into the microphone. But if you made it this far, tell me what you think when you hear it.
Let's get ready to dip, dive, and dodge.
So, if you're looking forward to those new sound effects coming to the Dip, Dive, and Dodge segment, I cannot wait myself. I think it's going to be a fun little game that we're probably going to play once or maybe twice a week instead of the daily debate. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.